this month we've been drinking budget whiskeys.
That's right.
So I figured, why don't we talk a little bit about whiskey history as far as bourbon is concerned.
Sounds like a good idea.
So today, we got a whole bunch of bourbons here.
Yeah.
And we'll sit around and talk about, bootleggers and moonshine and
all the things in between.
And what whiskey is, like what is bourbon? And why do we put an E in whiskey?
Yes.
And why we don't.
Sounds great.
So what do you think?
I said we do that right after this.
So hold my whiskey.
Welcome to Hold My Whiskey by Whiskey Pop.
My name's Jeff.
And I am still, unfortunately, Zane.
Unfortunate. So today, we're going to talk about whiskey history.
History as in origin?
I think some origin, how we got to where we're at. I mean, but how did we get from these moonshiners to whiskey hipsters?
Well, let's start with the idea that there was whiskey.
I mean, whiskey started almost 1,000 years ago.
So we know that there was that, but what got us to where we are right now is the Enlightenment.
The Enlightenment. So we ended up moving, the British moved us over to here, and then they took all our grain away, so we're like, we need to make something.
Yeah.
So we started making our own whiskey out of corn and anything else we could make.
Weird things like barley, rye.
So back around 1789,
yeah,
Evan Williams started their first distillery.
Which was a long time ago.
Really long time ago. That same year, a Baptist pastor by the name of Elijah Craig
decided, I need some additional whiskey. No,
he
said straight up, I need some whiskey.
That's right, the flock's driving me crazy. I need to drink.
That's right.
Did you know also around this time, 1799, George Washington over there at
Mount Vernon.
Yes,
right, yes.
Had their own distillery, and it was the largest distillery in the United States at that time.
With 11,000 barrels of whiskey?
11,000 gallons.
Oh, gallons, not barrels.
11,000 barrels. Woo! I don't think there were that many people in the state of Virginia.
I get my facts wrong.
But that's still a lot of whiskey back then.
Oh, sure, of course.
Now, we have to look at the fact that George Washington wasn't making that whiskey.
No, it was propelled off of his name, his something,
And they still make that whiskey today.
I did not know that.
You can go there and visit Mount Vernon and actually buy the rye whiskey that's been making there since 1799.
Do we know what the label is? Do you know what the label is?
I think it's Mount Vernon rye whiskey.
Oh, well, that's simple enough.
After that came around 1810.
Okay.
Old Overhaul, the one we talked about here recently.
Yes.
Abraham Overhaul and his dad opened up and started Old Overhaul.
Because I'm your Huckleberry.
I'm your Huckleberry. Also, I just read recently that John F. Kennedy was a big fan of Old Overhaul too.
And also Cameroon cigars.
That's true as well.
Yeah.
And Maryland.
Today on Whiskey Pop, how to not be monetized.
Oh yeah, that's true. Happy birthday
to you, Mr. President.
Mr. President. Okay, so anyway, then came in the 1800s, everybody and their grandma is making whiskey.
Oh, or are they just making straight white lightning?
I mean, they're going out and they're buying like maybe a half barrel of whiskey and making 15,000 bottles with it, and then pouring in turpentine, tobacco, spit, whatever else they could color it with to make it look like whiskey.
Yeah.
Which started the whole Bottle and Bond Act of 1897, which kind of started to form bourbon as we know it today.
Right, because what I have in this glass is, it's right here.
A rabbit hole, right?
Cape Hill. Yes, but again, think about this.
Yeah.
I mean, we're jumping 80 years in the future. This is not that different.
That's true.
Than what was going on 100 years ago.
That's true. I mean, so after the 1897 Act, they decided that this much corn is what needed to go into a whiskey, 51% at most for a bourbon. So that's pretty much driven whiskey in America since. We fast forward that, all of a sudden there's this whole new religious temperance thing that starts up.
Because whiskey makes men act badly.
That's right. So you become drunkards and you break break the law and you commit crime.
We can't have law breaking in this country, so by God, we're gonna get rid of whiskey.
So America goes into its second stage of Puritans.
Yeah, they
do. So and when they do that, suddenly we decide that whiskey, alcohol in general, is bad.
Yep.
And the temperance movement moves in by telling everybody and starting these anti-saloon movements and all that. And the next thing you know, we make whiskey illegal in the 18th Amendment.
So, what happens when you make whiskey illegal in trying to curb the horrid of society?
It's funny that you ask, because actually what it does is increases crime.
Create individuals such as Al Capone.
Yeah, the bootlegger.
And the bootlegger, that's right. Bootlegging from all the way from Canada
Yeah.
To Mexico.
That's true, and there's a huge highway set up for bootlegging.
Yeah.
I mean, I think there's actually, we were talking about this, I think there's actually highways now today that were bootlegging roads back in the 20s and 30s.
Yeah, about 20s and 30s. And of course, in our local area, that's 59 Highway,
That's
Oklahoma
right.
59 Highway, and Arkansas 59 Highway.
Now, there were a few distilleries that were still producing whiskey.
Medicinally.
Medicinally, kind of like how pot is medicinally in some states.
Because pot's the devil weed.
So, I mean,
It's the devil weed. It makes you turn into little devils.
So, I mean, whiskey alcohol in general became the same thing. And people started opening up their own little speakeasies in their houses.
That's right. And all the things that went with that, because, hey, if you're going to be illegal, might as well gamble, might as well...
That's right, because they were taking all that away, too, because there weren't any saloons because you couldn't drink.
Yep.
So all those things flourished, and what it did, it allowed the mafia to flourish, and they just exploded in the 20s and 30s. They took over the market. It was the mafia that was pushing whiskey and bootlegging rum and all that stuff across, and moonshine.
Yeah.
And once again, it became this kind of not hipster thing, this this more backwater, ghetto style thing going on.
And with the increase of bootlegging, it created a whole subculture genre, if you want to call it that, of guys who learn to take stock cars.
That's right.
And drive them really fast to outrun
the law.
The popo.
That's right.
And it gave birth to one of our country's sports.
One of the sports.
Sports, Jeffrey, of NASCAR.
That's right. NASCAR basically come from a bunch of bootleggers racing each other.
That's right.
To get to locations before the police would catch them.
Yeah.
So
exactly right.
Finally, America came to their senses after a major depression and entry into a new war.
Oh, yeah.
We finally decided we need to let people drink, or America is going to lose their proverbial shit.
The proverbial SHIT.
So with the 21st Amendment, we finally got rid of prohibition, and we cracked open the distilleries once again, and whiskey started to flourish. Whiskey became a legitimate thing again.
Yes, it did. It did become.
So, and then I've heard even recently that sometime in the late 80s, whiskey was almost gone. Bourbon was almost a dead market.
That's because everybody was going to vodka
and the clear liquids.
And yes, that's right.
It was popular to drink lots of martinis. It was popular to drink lots of vodka, mixed drinks and stuff. Nobody was buying whiskey.
Yeah, they thought whiskey was like what you got in a shot glass as a cowboy went.
Yeah. And it's funny, you watch videos even on YouTube today, you'll see people from other countries and they'll drink bourbon.
Yeah.
And I feel like a cowboy. That idea that whiskey is this old frontier thing still exists even today.
But in fact, it's not, because now in today's society,
it's a hipster drink.
Who's pushing whiskey? Damn you, hipsters.
Yeah, we're one of them.
Oh, we're not hipsters. I mean, well, maybe.
We're whiskey hipsters.
I guess.
How many bottles of whiskey do you have in your cabinet? That's what I thought. Have you drank them all? That's what I thought.
Well, ask me this. How many bottles of whiskey have I drank in the last 2 years?
Let's not ask that question. So what is bourbon? Bourbon is an American whiskey.
Oh, yes. It has a particular necessary recipe.
It has to be 51% corn.
And it has to be how much barley?
Oh, it can be anything after that. So it has to be barley, and it has to be rye or a wheat blend or anything like that. But it has to be absolutely 51% corn. to make it a bourbon.
Is that because the government decided it needed to be regulated?
That's correct.
Aha!
So we decided, the Scottish had their whiskey, and the Irish had their whiskey, and we thought, we need our own whiskey. We set the rule and the standard for our whiskey.
And that being the fact that it's our whiskey and it's their whiskey, is that why there's an E difference in whiskey?
That's exactly the reason why there's an E in our whiskey. So it's a regional thing. So if you go to Scotland, there's no E.
Yeah, that's right.
And then just recently, the Japanese have decided that their whiskey will not have an E in it.
Because of their Scottish background.
That's right. So the only ones that actually do put an E in it now is everybody else. So Irish put an E in it, we put an E in it, but Canada and Scotland and now Japan, no E.
Yeah, it's that distinction in the spelling of the word whiskey to denote. I feel like it's because of their root.
This is a tomato thing, I think.
I say tomato, you say tomato, tomato. Okay, go ahead.
But also, it has to, when it goes in barrel, it can't be more than 160 proof. When it comes out, it has to be at least 80 proof. You can't water that stuff down.
Okay, to be called bourbon.
To be bourbon. Here's a myth. Everybody thinks that bourbon has to come from Kentucky.
It doesn't.
It does not. You can make bourbon in any state in the United States. It can't be straight Kentucky straight bourbon unless it comes out of Kentucky.
So you mean to tell me that somebody in Tennessee can make a shit ton of whiskey?
They can make all the bourbon they want, but see, Tennessee set their own rules. They have to be
sure
charcoal.
hell did.
It has to be charcoal filtered to come out of Tennessee.
And the other interesting thing is one of the greatest manufacturers of whiskey of all time comes out of Tennessee.
Jack Daniels?
And when you go to some place like Hoity Toity, this is out of just pure, because I go to Hoity Toity places, and you ask for a bourbon, it pisses me off when they don't include
Jack Daniels in it?
Jack Daniels products.
Yeah, it's funny. Jack Daniels is the #1 selling whiskey in the United States. Ooh. And that bell tells us we're almost out of time. No.
Join us next week as we...
Yeah. So on top of that, it has to be in a barrel at a minimum of 2 years. Now,
that's right.
Bottle and Bond is a 4-year minimum, but for bourbon itself, 2 years. So that's the kind of the requirement. So we set all those standards. So whiskey now has gone from this backwoods country bumpkin moonshiner thing.
Yeah, that's right.
To now it is a heavily regulated, heavily practiced, and it's almost like its own religion.
Oh.
We go to the Church of Bourbon.
Can we be the priests of bourbon? I don't want to be a priest.
Priest of bourbon? No, I'd rather just be a
pontiff.
Yeah, a pontiff of bourbon. So, but now, whiskey has gone through quite a bit, and bourbon is a huge thing in the United States, and it's even bigger today than it's ever been. Oh, you tell us, what would you say is, in the rich history of whiskey, why do you drink whiskey?
Yeah. Did somebody put you on it? Do you feel like it's a status thing? And generally, I ask this because I think there's a lot of people that drink whiskey that don't really enjoy it.
Ooh, really? Then they're just doing it because it's social?
I know it's because it's social.
There might be some truth in that. I think that's a lot of reason why people go chasing after unicorns. The Blantons, the Pappies.
Yeah, of course.
They're going after those because it's cool to have those in your stock.
They taste really good.
They do taste good. But do they sometimes taste better than some of these other whiskeys? Maybe not. In the meantime, you guys continue to be cool this week, and catch us next week for another Hold My Whiskey.
Or let's just drink our whiskey.
Let's do that. In the meantime, cheers.